I'll be doing Texas Tech. So first, I'll talk a little bit about their head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So, head coach Joey McGuire is entering his third season as the head coach of Texas Tech. This is his only college head coaching job that he's had, and he was hired by Texas Tech in hopes of improving their recruiting to where that would probably increase their win total with more talent because he's coached at some of these Texas high schools that have a whole lot of talented football players and has connections with those high schools. And It has worked. The year before he got there in 2021, Texas Tech had the 75th ranked recruiting class, which was horrible. But then in 2022, they made a big improvement to 43rd. Of course, that's still not great. And I know a lot of those recruits weren't his, but still a nice improvement. And then his first full recruiting class in 2023 was the 28th ranked recruiting class. So another big improvement. And then this year's recruiting class, they were 25th. So they finally got a top 25 recruiting class. But his record at Texas Tech has not been great. So his overall record there is 15 and 11. So the first year was a success. They went 8-5, which I know is not great, but they were expected to do worse than that year. But then last season, which was his second season, was a disappointment, going 7-6. They were expected to do better than that. Now, I think that he has the ability to be successful at Texas Tech, but it doesn't matter what a YouTuber like me thinks a coach is capable of. They have to develop the players and turn that into wins. I'm going to appear higher on Texas Tech than I actually am in this video. I don't think they're a great team at all, but I don't think they're a bad team. They're pretty average. They don't really have any positions where they're elite at, but they do have some really good players on their team. Starting on the offensive side at quarterback, Baron Morton comes back, who started 8 games for them last season. I'm not real high on him. I think he's pretty average. He had in those 8 games 1,524 yards passing, and he did complete 66.2% of his passes, which was good. But his average at 6.3 a throw was pretty bad. And of course, that isn't his full numbers for the season because he did play some as a backup too. And One of those 8 games, he didn't even play the whole game in because of an injury. Uh, mm, at running back, they have one of the best running backs in college football coming back, Taj Brooks. He had last season on 290 carries, 1,541 yards, and 10 touchdowns, averaging 5.3 a carry, and he had 8 games of over 100 rushing yards. But depth to help him out is kind of questionable. But he's one of those running backs like Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State that can take an unlimited number of carries. So at wide receiver, they bring in a really good wide receiver from Washington State, Josh Kelly, who had last season 61 catches for 923 and 8 touchdowns, averaging 15.1 a catch, and had 4 games of over 100 receiving yards. And they also have coming back Koi Eakin, who played in 10 games and started 7 games last season and became a good receiver for Texas Tech. He had 36 catches for 416 and 2 touchdowns, averaging 11.6 a catch. And he had 2 games of over 100 receiving yards. And they are going to be strong at tight end. Tight end, I think, is going to help them out with the pass catching this season. They bring in a good tight end from Arizona State, Jalen Conyers, who only started 6 games, but has played in 23 games these last 2 seasons, and has in that 68 catches for 784 and 5 touchdowns, averaging 11.5 a catch. And they bring in another transfer tight end who comes from an FCS team, but did do well there. His name is John Carlos Miller, who played in 10 games and had 25 catches for 453 and 4 touchdowns, averaging a really impressive 18.1 yards per catch. And I saw that he looked really good in the spring. So their quarterback is going to have a decent amount of good options to throw the football to. And then on the offensive line, they only returned one starter here. It's the center who is really good. His name is Caleb Rogers, who only allowed 17 pressures and 3 sacks last season. And they bring in 4 transfers on the offensive line, and 2 of them are good. Uh, they brought in 2 good guards from littler teams, but really good players from where they come from. So they bring in a offensive lineman from Toledo. His name is Vinny Scurry, who only allowed 9 pressures and 2 sacks last season. And then they bring in one from Memphis, Davion Carter, who only allowed 8 pressures and 1 sack last season. Uh, so their offense should be solid, but I don't think it's going to be elite. And then moving on to the defensive side, they were pretty average here last year, and probably about the same this year. So on the defensive line, no starters return, but they did bring in one really good transfer from Rice, uh, to Braylon Carroll, who had last season 46 tackles and 3.5 sacks and 31 total pressures and a fumble recovery. But other than him, they are questionable on the defensive line. I don't think they're going to be great here. And then at linebacker, they do have 2 really good players here. They've got Ben Roberts coming back, who is one of the best linebackers in the Big 12. He had 107 tackles and uh, 12 total pressures and 2 forced fumbles and an interception last season. And then they have Jacob Rodriguez, who only played in 5 games last season because of an injury, but he's a really good player. He had in that 32 tackles and 2 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery and 2 pass breakups and an interception. And then in the secondary, they've got 2 good players coming back. They've got a really good safety, CJ Baskerville, who played in 11 games and had 78 tackles and 5 pass breakups and 2 interceptions. And then they've got at cornerback Braylon Lukes, who had in 12 games 40 tackles, 8 pass breakups, and an interception. But the other starters in the secondary are questionable. And then special teams does look good. So now moving on to the predictions. So they start the year against Abilene Christian, which will be a real easy win. And then they play on the road at Washington State. So this is a tough one. I had a hard time with this one. I do think Texas Tech is better than Washington State, but the game is at Washington State, which is going to give them a really good chance to win this game. I do think this will be close, but I think Washington State is going to be pretty bad this year. They don't have much coming back. They lost their best players from last season. So I think Texas Tech has enough to get this win. So then they play North Texas, which should be a pretty easy win. So then now they're playing Arizona State, a team that Texas Tech should be good enough to beat by around 2 touchdowns. And then they play Cincinnati, another team that Texas Tech badly needs to beat, and I think they will beat by a couple of touchdowns. Mm. Cincinnati and Arizona State are two of the worst teams in the country. So now they would be 5-0, and now they've got a road game against Arizona. This is going to be a close one, I think. I think there'll be quite a few points scored in this one because Arizona's defense, I don't think, is going to be as good as it was last year. And Texas Tech's defense, I think, is going to have a hard time stopping Arizona. Arizona, I think, is actually going to be a good running team this year. I think they'll be able to run a lot on Texas Tech, and uh, really the quarterback makes the difference to me in this uh, game because Arizona's quarterback Fafada or Fafita, whatever his name is a much better quarterback than Texas Tech's quarterback, and I think he'll make some big plays to win Arizona this game. So then they play Baylor, a team that is probably going to be a little bit improved this year, but it's a home game for Texas Tech, and I still think Texas Tech is a little bit better than Baylor, but I do think it'll be really close. So now they play on the road at TCU, a close one. TCU has a really good group of wide receivers, and they don't really have a running back as good as Taj Brooks at Texas Tech, but the quarterback situation is pretty similar with TCU and Texas Tech, and so is the offensive line. And TCU, I do think has a little more talent on the defensive side than Texas Tech does. They've got a better overall group of linebackers than Texas Tech does. But I do think these teams are overall pretty even. So I'm just going to take the home team. So I think TCU wins a real close one. So then on the road at Iowa State, Iowa State I think is a little bit better than Texas Tech is. Not really going by talent because Iowa State is not that talented of a team, but they've got a lot more experience coming back than Texas Tech does. And it is on the road. Iowa State's a really tough place to play in the Big 12. I think Texas Tech loses this one, but I do think it'll be pretty close. So then Colorado. So Colorado, I think, will score some in this game. I think it'll be pretty close. Colorado has a great quarterback and some good wide receivers, but Colorado can't run the ball and they've got no lines of scrimmage, so they're one dimensional. And Texas Tech, I think, will score a lot on Colorado in this game. Taj Brooks, their running back, I think will eat up Colorado's defense. Colorado doesn't have anybody in the front seven that's any good at all. And Colorado does have two really good players in the secondary, but the other two starters in the secondary aren't any good. And I think Texas Tech will take advantage of that and still be able to throw a lot on them in this game and outscore Colorado. So then on the road at Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State doesn't have a very good defensive line. I think Texas Tech will take advantage of that and run a lot in this game. But Oklahoma State has a much better offense than Texas Tech, and I don't think Texas Tech is going to have much hope of slowing them down. Oklahoma State's got a, a really experienced offensive line and a quarterback that I think is better than Texas Tech's, and a running back that's even better than Taj Brooks, Ollie Gordon, and they've got a better group of wide receivers than Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech may be able to throw some on Oklahoma State because Oklahoma State's cornerbacks aren't very good, but their safeties are really good, and I just don't think Texas Tech has enough to win this one. But I think it could be pretty close. But Oklahoma State, I think, wins by at least a touchdown. So then they end the season at home against West Virginia. West Virginia has a great run game. They might have one of the best rushing uh, units in the country, not just in the Big 12 this year, but they're not very good at throwing the ball. They're pretty one dimensional offensively. And their defense is solid, but not great. Now, I do think that this will be a really close game, and I think West Virginia is a little bit better team than Texas Tech, but I have a feeling that Texas Tech is going to get one win this year against somebody they're not expected to, and I think it's West Virginia. So my final prediction for Texas Tech is 8-4 overall and 5-4 in the conference. So it's possible that they could lose to West Virginia and maybe beat Arizona. I think they'll get one win out of Arizona, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. I picked West Virginia to be the win for Texas Tech because it's the home game of the three. Oklahoma State, I think, is a little too good for Texas Tech to win. Uh, but I really thought before I did the research for this prediction video that Texas Tech was a six-win team this year. But when I looked close into the roster and looked really carefully at the schedule, I figured out that I think they can probably do a little better than that. But I think this is their ceiling for this season. But that will be it with this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe, and I'll be back soon.